International Migrants Day, December the 18th. That's the focus. If you want to get something in the news thing coming up in the future, and in fact, if you look at newspapers, and when I say newspapers, I mean newspapers, magazines, websites, radio, and in fact TV. Almost everything that you read or see is known in advance. There's very, very little that the newsrooms in these organisations don't know. Use that event that's going to happen to convince the editor that your little statement or story or comment is newsworthy because it's pegged to a date or to an event coming up. That's really, as long as you've got this upcoming news peg, you're halfway there. And that's true of an announcement or your news or your company being launched or a letter or going on the radio. So 18th of December is a great date because it's International Day. I'm sure if I rang up the editor and said it's International Migrants Day, he'd say, is it? No idea. But it doesn't matter because you say it's a United Nations Day, it's an international day, and you can convince them that, it's an international day, that's a news peg. So, and you say, I've got something to say, I'm going to write a letter, I want to be interviewed, and they'll think, oh, good, that's Friday, put it in the diary, we've got a little program coming up, or we've got something in the paper. So the fact that it's December the 18th is a wonderful, wonderful opportunity. Journalists just need news pegs, and this is one of them. The first thing is you've got to decide why you want to write a letter to the editor or why you want to say something on the radio. There's a number of reasons why letters, and I keep saying newspapers, but if that shop over the road, I went there this morning, there's a shop over there that's got, I started to count them, and there's about 250 magazines in there. Almost all of them have letters to the editor. That's 250 possible outlets for whatever you want to say or do. And there's hundreds of others. That's without all the local papers all over this country. And there's lots of radio stations. So there's a huge number of opportunities that if you really want to get your company or your theatre group or your just a statement about migrants because you're angry about the way people are being treated. One of the reasons is to get your message to people. Legislators or MPs or councillors or people with influence quickly read letters. If they don't see the letter or hear the phone in, one of their members of staff probably will, or someone that they're interested in. So it's a very good way of getting your statement or cause to the attention of people who might be able to do something about it or might be interested in taking it up and magnifying it. So that's the same for radio and it's the same for TV. So I think it is an important way of getting messages into the media. So the time is right. It's good. We got a news peg. We've got December the 18th. There's time to think about what you want to say. The timing is very good. There's lots of opportunities. Just think of all the publications. And also don't forget that some of these publications have more than one letters page. There are, for instance, newspapers that have letters to the editor in general, but then they'll have sports letters or book letters as well. They have separate sections. So there's literally hundreds, thousands of possibilities of getting stories into publications and on websites. So we want to write a letter, and if you write a letter, the most important thing is you've got to decide what to say, because otherwise you'll do a ramble. It is no good writing about migration. That's a huge subject. And then similarly for an interview, if you want to go to a local radio station and say, look, it's International Migrants Day, I or someone I know who's a migrant could come on to speak for 5 minutes, say, and you can specify the time. Before you go on air, you are making the rules. This is where you've got some power. Later on, you haven't got power, because anybody could ring in, and then you're forced to answer their question. But for the moment, you've got the power. You can say, I want to talk about this subject. I want to talk about, I don't know, myself, or a new enterprise, or why I am angry on International Migrants Day, or just International Migrants Day, or some aspect that you think is not being covered. Why aren't British people who go abroad called migrants? Why are they expatriates? And lots of publications would think, oh, that's interesting. Well, we'll do it. So that's the most important thing. Obviously, you've got to think of a topic that you want to write about and feel confident in talking or writing about. The next most important thing is to decide who you're going to write to or speak for. Because you can't just think, oh, well, I'm going to speak or I'll write a letter without knowing who it is, because otherwise you'll write a letter to the Times, which ought to go to the Sun, or you'll write a letter for your local paper, which is 900 words long, and no local paper in Britain has ever written anything over 400 words. So you've got to decide where you want to put your message verbally. That's the most important. Just think about it for a moment. You know, it's an open field. You can do what you want. You can write about yourself. And if you're a migrant, I mean, when we went round, it was interesting to know who you were, but as a journalist, I would say, not very interesting, because it's an educational qualification, or I live in Hackney, or so what? And then one or two people began to say a little bit more about themselves, and that's when it gets interesting. So you could say, I mean, you as a migrant know more about yourself than anyone else in the world. You are the world's leading expert on yourself. So you can go on and say, I want to talk about my experience. I want you to interview me for 5 minutes on my experience as a migrant in Britain, and to a radio station. And I think some of them would say, oh, okay, it's in the news, so it's an interesting topic. And then they'd say, well, who are you? What sort of thing do you want to say? And you can then say, well, I've had terrible experiences, or I'm so happy to be in this wonderful country, which is probably the best in the world. And they'd say, oh, yes, please. So you can do whatever you want. So you can talk about your experiences, why you came here, why you left. Or you could talk about what the British people in your own country are like. I mean, that's also migration, and it's interesting. You've got to find a way of making it interesting. Get away from the idea that it's migration into something a little bit personal or a story. Or you could talk about why International Day of Migration is important to this country or to me or something. So you have to just think about it. Journalism tends to follow, especially in this country, but everywhere really, it's a sort of pack mentality. All journalists follow each other, and subjects get in the news, and then everyone follows, because you're, as an editor, very frightened that you'll be missing out on. You look at the other publications and you think, oh, they're all doing it, we better do it. If you've got migrants in the news, and every day you've got to imagine, all over the country, there are people thinking, migrants are in the news, it's a hot topic, but you know, we've said everything there is to say, what can we do? Oh, here comes a guy, he's got something else to say, he's got his own experience, he's launching a little new project. Oh, well, let's do that. And so they'll jump on it. Okay. And conversely, people think sometimes it's nice to have not just what this publication or that publication does, but something that goes against it, a little bit controversial. And so you won't change the policy of the publication or the radio station, but they might think, oh, just today we'll do something a bit different. People will think we're a bit liberal-minded or something, you know, a bit controversial, because journalists like controversy. So you're in a good situation here. You've got the date, you've got a good subject, you've got people who know what they're talking they want, and if you don't give them exactly what they want, then that is the truth. And it's very, you just have to face it. And the media is still quite powerful, and if you want to get into it, you have to take it as it is, with all its terrible faults, and think, well, I'll try and work through it or round it or whatever. And that is, I'm afraid, what we're stuck with. Yeah, and I mean, this is also the truth, that the journalists have a lot of power. When they're interviewing you, they can select you or turn you down or say we're not interested in you. You know, that's the power they have. And when they do the interview or ask you to write, they can shape it in a certain way and say, well, we want you to write on this, but you still have, until the point you're on air or you're writing, you still can say, well, no, that's not what I'm interested in, I don't want to do that. And then try to go to someone else, because there are a lot of outlets. That's the best. When you write a letter, you could all go away and write a letter and it won't be published. No one can guarantee it. You might ring up 10 stations, radio stations, and say, look, I've got a fantastic story. You might be turned down, but I mean, that what we've got to do is find ways of, as you say, of finding the hook. I mean, this is big news in this country at the moment, so you have to find ways and persevere until you can find ways of getting the message in. And one is the absolute basics. When you write a letter, you don't have to worry about, you just write, dear editor, begin it, dear editor, and sign it yours sincerely. Find a publication. Almost all publications have somewhere on their website or whatever the basic rules, as it were, for what they want. They'll give you probably a rough length and the sort of things they don't want. And you have to pitch it so that you roughly fit that organisation's interest. So it's a very uphill task. So you check the programme, check the publication, focus on the areas that you want to write or speak about, and then write down your main points. Because we're talking about something very small here. Letters are brief, a radio phone-in is very brief, so you've got to have a sort of message or 2 or 3 messages. So the first thing is letters in almost all publications are very short, even in so-called sort of intellectual publications like the New Statesman. They're still short. So that's the first thing I notice when I look at them. And the other thing is if you actually read them, many of them, I would say about 2/3, or maybe in some of them, one I looked at this morning was about 90%. They all referred to an article already published. And that's the easiest way of getting something published, is to refer to something else being published. Editors like that because it shows that people are reading. But with December the 18th, in a way, that's what that hook does for you. You don't have to have something published about migration, although heaven knows there's enough published about migration in this country. But you can begin by saying, as the International Day of Migration approaches, something, 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 about whatever you want. Oh, and almost, if you look at the letters and you read them, you'll find that almost all of them go straight to the point. There's no long introduction, it's just bang, straight in there. That's partly because they've all been edited. And they tend, on the whole, they're not heavily edited like an article or a news report, but they'll be edited so that if there's waffle at the beginning, or what I as a journalist would call waffle, but which you may consider your heartfelt feelings, have been reduced to a sort of bullet point, straight to the point, you get on with it. There's no room otherwise, so they're very short, they're straight to the point, you don't have to be polite, just get on. So yes, check the programme or check the publication. You've got to write roughly for the interest of that publication and roughly in the style. And look at a few letters just to get an idea of what they like. Get straight to the point. If you can, refer to an already published story or to an upcoming day. December the 18th, you want to get that letter in on the 15th or 16th. It is okay to write to lots of people. The one danger is that if you're an organisation doing it, say Migrant Voice arranged it, and say everybody, there are 20 letters, and everybody writes to, say, 6 publications, and one of the publications uses it, and then the other 5 think, we don't want to publish that because it's already been published. Then you get a name for someone that writes what is effectively not a letter, but a sort of press release sort of thing, and you get a slightly bad name, but there's no reason why you shouldn't do it. It is okay. I personally would go for one at a time and learn. If they're not going to use it, just try and think why not, and learn and try again another time. So decide your message, find the publication, focus on the key point. That's true of radio as well as print and online. Keep it short. And I think be positive. I do think be positive is important. There's no point in if you're going to just grouse and complain and whinge, they probably won't like it. It's probably better to be positive, and in any case, I think it works on the whole, and not be confrontational. Even if you're being positive, I think that's the final point, is try and recommend a course of action, or if you can suggest it, or even if it's only joining an organisation or looking at what other people are doing, because people seem to like that. It's not just a letter then, it's taking it one step on. Say, if you can, say what should be done, not just being negative or critical, but if you can say, I suggest this, this and this, that is good. If you mention an MP, is the obvious example, or local councillors, if it's a local paper, or specialists in an area that you might be writing about, they may or may not see it, but you can be absolutely certain that somebody will draw their attention to it. And then you've got the attention of someone that might matter to you or your campaign or your business or whatever it is. So naming names is good. Those names get passed round. People say, how do you stop? I always think the last point of a letter or even a talk really is a full stop. I don't think. No, if you've got a funny final sentence, then you can wrap it up and there's a little punchline. It's great, but don't worry about it. When you've said what you want to say, full stop, the end, and that's it. I mean, if there are 200 letters, and there often are hundreds, it's no good saying roughly the same thing as everyone else, because then it's a lottery. Yours may be picked or it may not be. And it's good that everyone may be writing this subject, but you want to find a little angle or a funny way of writing or a good story to illustrate it or something. The level of the readers, well, we've already said that. That's really important to know who the readers or listeners are. And if you say to a radio station, I want to go on, I'm going to talk about a deaf theatre group that we were talking about, or of migrants, you have to pitch your language, the idea, and also how you address it. It's no good going on the radio and talking about Section 8 of the Immigration Act. As soon as you say that, everyone's gone. You know, basically they've switched over to something else. Who knows what Section 8 is? Who knows in this country what the Immigration Act is? You've got to talk in a way that people will understand, so you don't use jargon and all these phrases. You have to somehow explain them and talk about them in a conversational way. I mean, in radio, that's the key thing. It's a conversation, as they like to say in radio, with your listener. You hope there's more than one, but you're talking to a person. And similarly with the letter, it's your reader. Obviously don't be disappointed if the letter isn't.